Welcome, Michelle, Joe, and Cormac. We might just start really quickly. We're going to talk a little bit about the funding journey for startups, and which Joe and Cormac have definitely gone on, and Michelle from Enterprise Ireland has definitely got her view of the spectrum from the other side. So we might just quickly start with Michelle. And we'll have a look at the funding landscape from where you are. What is it that EI is sort of looking at, and what are the different stages of funding that EI gets involved in, Michelle?
Thanks, Tom. Lovely to talk to everybody today on this webinar. I suppose just a bit of background. I work in the HBCU Accelerate division, and my role is working with portfolio companies to, I suppose, help them secure funding, equity funding in particular. So we have two levels of support at the moment. We have the Pre-Seed Start Fund, and then we have the Innovative HBCU funding program. So I suppose one of them is at an earlier stage than the other. So I suppose for the Innovative HBCU funding program, we probably would expect to see companies a bit further along on their journey. With the pre-seed funding, we're probably looking at companies who have started on a journey, have maybe achieved something, maybe developed an MVP. They've got a little bit of traction, maybe a first customer, some validation, I suppose, of the opportunity. A good team, have identified maybe some sort of a USP, but that they need funding to get to some, additional, get to some key milestones. So that's a funding package of 100,000 in a convertible loan note. And we do have, it's co-funded, so it's usually in two 50,000 tranches, each of which are co-funded, 5,000 each, usually by the promoter. And I suppose we're hoping that companies will avail of the pre-seed fund, and from that they'll get to milestones that'll make them more investable. And then maybe we're looking at an innovative HBCU funding package. And I suppose we do expect companies at that stage to have, some reasonable validation of the market, and that it's kind of clear that there is kind of scaling potential in the company, that there's an international opportunity. They've started to build up, a good team. So again, it goes team, technology, traction. You could look at these three things, and also, an international potential. And look, every project is different, so every project has different sort of milestones that are showing that they're moving in the right direction. But it's so we were kind of looking at each case by case. But I suppose we're like any investor. We kind of want to see that if we do invest, that we are going to get a longer term return. Our return that we're looking for is more like we want to see job growth, and we want to see export growth from companies, in time. And we probably are a more patient investor, because we do usually have a long relationship with companies as they progress. But I suppose we still have to, make sure that the investments we're making, that the companies have, are showing good potential at the beginning.
Thanks for that. That's a really insightful overview. And I've seen and experienced that EI is a very supportive and encouraging investor. I think you really tend to partner with your organizations and the companies that you invest in to their benefit. So we might actually, on that front, turn to Cormac Noonan, who is the co-founder of Wolf Academy. And Cormac, you might just tell us a real high level one line on what Wolf Academy does, and maybe talk a little bit about some of your funding, the funding that you've taken, and how that's helped you grow the company.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. And hello, everybody. So at Wolf Academy, we provide wellbeing solutions for schools. So that includes students, teachers, head teachers, and parents as well. And I suppose on our journey, we've been going now for 4 years, and we've got many different funding from, we did the New Frontiers program, and we've done got some innovation vouchers and used them with Learnovate. We've also got stuff from Leo and different types of funding, and also going into schools, we do in-person work as well. So that gives us funding to keep going, and it's also really helped us develop our solutions, our online solutions, by going into the schools and testing, different types of workshops, different techniques around well-being for students, and understanding then what we can develop when it comes to the online and what works best and how we engage, especially with the like working with teenagers. How do you engage them in these well-being practices? So, but yeah, we've used many different types of funding, and I think it all has helped at different stages. Especially, working with Learnovate has been great to really develop our online programs and to make them more accessible and easy to use and navigate for students. And that funding with the innovation voucher was very useful for that as well. And I think it's just a nice help along the journey as you go and as you develop and as you grow, that you need funding at different stages. So it's great to see that there's so many options out there. And just, I suppose, as Michelle touched on as well, with Enterprise Ireland and the Leos and others, there's great options if you hear about them and you know about them.
Great. Yeah, and you've done a few vouchers with us, and I know that we partnered with you and with Enterprise Ireland on some of that research funding. That's been a great process of collaboration. We might turn to Joe, because I know Joe Fernandez is the CEO of ALPACA, which is a recent spin out from Trinity College. Joe, you've got some experience both from the pre-spin out commercialization funding side of it, as well as the post-spin out. So maybe just tell us a little bit about what your company's doing and how you leveraged funding to develop that company.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thanks, Learnovate, for the invite today. I'm Joe, folks. Joe Fernandez, CEO of ALPACA. We identify kids who may struggle to read before they can read print, and we do that with some technology that the kids play on an iPad, little iPad game. So I was actually that commercialization consultant that Trinity brought in to do the feasibility study originally on this project back at probably the end of 2020, 2021. And that then became a funded commercialization fund project. So we got our 350,000 and we worked on an 18-month research project in Trinity. And as a new business, we created a new limited company at the end of June last year. And we licensed the IP that was created during that Comms Fund project. And we spun out of Trinity as a standalone company. Since then, we've actually been working with the local enterprise office first. We did some consultancy support with them for new market development. We were then awarded a priming grant with local enterprise office before Christmas, which was to employ a new staff member. And actually, we handed that priming grant back to the local enterprise office just after Christmas. We didn't draw down on it because we moved across to Enterprise Ireland. We got considerable traction with the project when we started in the school space last September. We've screened 8,000 infants since we started last September. So we've been working with one of Michelle's colleagues, Mary Rogers, who's one of the EdTech development advisors. And the decision we made between us was to not go for the PSSF, but actually go straight for the innovative HPSU, the high potential startup funding. And we're actually in the middle of that application now at the moment, and seeing our first round of external investors next Thursday. So yeah, we've probably seen most parts of the journey so far, and plenty more to come, please God.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that insight, Joe. And you and Cormac are two of many companies that are probably reaching out to Enterprise Ireland for funding supports and development supports. So I might turn it back to Michelle and ask you, how can a startup company differentiate themselves in such a crowded market?
Well, I suppose the key thing for any startup, isn't it? It's, being able to show that there is a market demand, and some kind of validation with your customers, I think is always key. So I think from an early stage, reaching out to customers and having that kind of engagement, I think is always a good thing. And I suppose also, being able to, if you're able to attract in good investors, sometimes you can attract in investors that are, that have some maybe market knowledge as well, because we would see that, I'd say with the majority of our innovative HPSU investments, especially the first round, it's nearly always with some sort of private investor. We very rarely, we do occasionally see the VCs and the institutional investors coming in, but it's much more private investment. So sometimes I think if you bring in investors to the table that have an insight into the market as well, and that can kind of help validating, that the opportunity as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. In terms of validation, obviously, traction in the marketplace and investor support, with expertise, is gonna take you a long way. And I might actually just say to Cormac, tell us. I mean, you've been at this for a couple of years now. You've probably faced and overcome a number of challenges. So maybe would you be able to tell us some of the challenges that you might have come across, and any lessons that you've learned in that funding and growth phase?
Yeah, I'm smiling to myself because there's so many challenges on the journey. I think me and Joe were talking before that we wouldn't recommend anyone doing it, but it's very rewarding at the same time. And I suppose in terms of funding, the challenges that we found is just maybe, it's hard to think ahead of the time how much funding you might need for a certain project you're working on at the time. So it's, sometimes you might be tight on funding when you need it, and the applications take a while. So if you can plan ahead and see what funding you're going to need for the work you're doing or the project you're on, instead of waiting until, I need it now and then I apply, because then you're probably too late. So it's just, if I was doing it again, I'd probably plan out the roadmap a bit better of where I'm going to need the funding and apply in advance. And also just maybe talking with people who have already applied for the funding to get their advice on the applications and things like that, and just things you need to include, and maybe milestones you need to hit before you apply. Like Michelle was saying there, you need to be kind of at a certain stage for different types of funding. So just knowing what stage you need to be at, instead of maybe some of the funding we applied for we weren't ready for, and just, I suppose, again, having that roadmap of what funding to apply for at what stage would be helpful. But in general, it's been a very worthwhile experience for us applying for all this funding, because we have got lots of funding in different areas. So I would always recommend people to do it.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, no, I think those are some really good lessons that other business owners and entrepreneurs can probably take on board, especially around the planning and timing, and being ready for that. I'm sure Joe can probably speak to that. You may have had some of the challenges on your own, or you may have had different ones. Joe, maybe you could give us some insights from your war stories.
Oh, listen, I've got many war stories. I'd echo what Cormac said. You got to be looking down the road and thinking what you need long in advance of when you actually need it. But there's a couple of other things that we've learned. As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you're taking on board 100% of the risk with that business. And my role as CEO is to try and de-risk that, and to understand then, when we're talking to the local enterprise office, to Enterprise Ireland, to angels, to VCs, what level of risk are they willing to take on board, and what they need to have been proven or validated, as Michelle was saying, before we can approach. And it's a different threshold for each of them. And one is, there isn't a hierarchy of what's better. There's different stages of the journey when you might want to reach out for different ones. The second part is what's the measurable at the end? What does success look like with each of those four bands, Leo, Enterprise Ireland, Angels, VCs? What does success look like? How do you measure it? How do they measure it? And working with them. I mean, going in there, and I'm not the only entrepreneur in the country who's telling everybody how great our business is. But, everybody is plugging into metrics and funding mechanisms. Fundamentally, we're trying to create jobs. That's what we're trying to do. Indigenous, high-tech, jobs that are going to support the economy of the future. And that's what we're doing. But how do we measure success? The last thing I'd say on it is, I've learned from sort of my own mistakes over the years. I've been at this for quite a while in different businesses, is don't just go looking for money's sake. What does your business need? What's the value you're trying to create? What is it that the money will allow you to do that you can't do without it? People that come, I was an advisor and a consultant with the local enterprise office, and businesses that came to the local enterprise office who had done a lot of the groundwork, who had proved some of the core metrics, who were bringing information to allow the local enterprise office to make an informed decision to support, usually got through the gap. Those that came with the handout and an expectation, it was a longer journey, and we kind of got there as well. So I have no expectation that anybody owes the business a favor here at all. You know, we're trying to make kids' lives better, but in order to do that, we need the right commercial partners along the way. And as a business, we've got 2 commercial avenues. We can self-generate through, you know, selling, and then we have grant and we have private equity funding as well. So a few different levers there. But for me, I think it's what do you need the money for? Is the money the right money right now? Do you need to be spending time? It is a considerable amount of time to invest to do any funding application. So what is it going to allow to happen that couldn't happen without it? And is it a game changer? Can you go about it your day to day? Because it's very easy to get lost in paperwork in this space. It really is. But I found my interactions with the local enterprise office and EI to be exceptional so far in terms of wanting to help people that are willing to do the hard work. And we, like Cormac as well, we're absolutely willing to put our shoulder to the wheel and do what we need to do.
Yeah, no, that's a really good insight. I might actually ping it back to Michelle a little bit on that one, because Joe, you asked about success metrics and navigating that funding landscape. Michelle, as a senior development advisor, you work with companies. How do you help those companies navigate that landscape and understand what supports there are available?
Yeah, I suppose thanks. Joe mentioned the Leos. I suppose we work in a big ecosystem really of startups, and EI actually probably touches on all of them, as in we've got some sort of a funding role with the Leos, the BICs, the NDRC. So we kind of work, we see them as partners, and we kind of see it as a continuum of support. So, you know, going into the Leo initially at a very early stage and getting a certain amount of support, and then I suppose, you know, you're getting to, I'm like, every business is different, so there's no black and white, this milestone needs to be cheaper business, but I suppose it's showing that a company is moving in the right direction, you know, that they're getting some, you know, that there's something clear that it's a positive, or even if they're learning, maybe they've moved in the wrong direction and then they have to pivot, but actually they've learned something along the way, and maybe they discover, they start out and say, well, actually we thought the market opportunity was X, but actually now we've gone out, we've actually discovered it's Y, and we've been able to pivot, and you know, now we want to fund the business, you know, we've got a clearer picture of how to go forward. So I suppose, look, it's a lot of it also goes back to the teams, the promoters. Like, do the promoters have the wherewithal to, you know, actually execute on their plan? And I suppose showing a certain amount, you have to be very resilient, I think, to be a startup promoter. And I suppose it's being able to show that resilience like that. You know, I've plenty of cases where they've come in doing one thing and actually had to pivot because, you know, it hasn't been quite the right way. But I suppose it's a positive to us because it shows the resilience of the promoter, that they're able to adapt their business and adapt their plan to changing circumstances, or, you know, the opportunity not being quite what they thought it was. So they're the kind of things we're looking out for. And I think being able to avail of all the supports along the way where it suits. I mean, I don't mean in case of like that you have to reach out to everybody, but I suppose it's again being able to say, well, look, you know, being able to identify the right support at the right time and being able to kind of move along with that, you know, making the most of it. I think they're all kind of key things that we look at. But look, we sometimes cases come to us and, you know, promoter has been working away on their own. They haven't availed of any supports, and they come in and suddenly they've, you know, maybe raised some money, because obviously with our innovative HBCU funding, we're co-funders. So there is a certain pressure on promoters to raise funding elsewhere when they're coming to approach us. And we often have people come in, they've worked away quietly, building a business and securing investors, and have come into us with a fairly advanced stage. So there's the whole spread there in the startup world.
Great. No, that's very helpful. And you know, Enterprise Ireland has been really supportive of all the startups that have come into our orbit. But I'm aware that there's a lot of supports in the marketplace for the research collaborations and growth that are outside of Enterprise Ireland. And maybe just as startup Joe, maybe you could just talk a little bit. I know you've access to a few things, both the AWS accelerator, for example, or other places for funding. Maybe there's some advice that you can give other startup companies that might be helpful.
Yeah, Tommy, just one thing I want to pick up there that Michelle said, or she used the word around innovation, because it is the innovative, HPSU funding. there's a difference. I was chatting to a chap this morning on LinkedIn. He's turned over he'll turn over €1.5 million this year in an ed tech, and he's never taken any external funding. He's done it all from the bedroom, and he's worked it up from the ground up. But there's not much tech in there or innovation in the actual business process itself. You know, it's a really, really solid business. But the next phase he was inquiring about is kind of how do we start innovating? How do we create technology, IP, patentable, information in there? And I suppose that piece there, again, from a business owner point of view, is kind of, you constantly ask yourself, what business are you in? What is your business? Because the customers, we've spent 2.5 years talking to customers. I've got 150 of our customers on my mobile phone. They WhatsApp me all the time. We're very, very close, and there's lots of feedback they give of things they want, improvements they want to see. And you have to actually say to yourself, well, what business am I in here? What do I want to develop? And that then links into your question of what are the supports there are. We did the pre-accelerator in the NDRC. We did that one online down in where did we do it? Down in Kerry or Cork? In Cork, we did that in Cork. We just finished doing the AWS and Learnovate EdTech Accelerator there, which is brilliant, for the last 8-10 weeks. So there's lots of supports there. And again, for me, the supports, I mean, being an entrepreneur is an isolating and lonely journey. It's a, my head is a dangerous neighborhood. I wouldn't go in there alone, as somebody would joke. And it's very true. The dark nights of the soul and the imposter syndrome and all the rest of it. If you're waiting for the value of your business to be validated by somebody outside, you're on for a long journey. You have to intuitively know that what you're doing is adding value to somebody's life. That for me, if your customer first, if your customer is telling you that this values to them, if it is that thing they call a painkiller rather than a vitamin, if it really is moving the dial in their life, then that's something really to hold on to, because there's a lot of dark days being an entrepreneur. Every conversation isn't a yes. Everybody doesn't jump up and down. There's different people with different insights, different backgrounds, different, metrics. So for me, I've kind of supported myself or supported the business by bringing in people that know more, which is not overly difficult. People that bring in different viewpoints, different paradigms, different expertise, and surround ourselves with a network of people that can help us see things that we can't see today, or may look at things differently than we currently do. And things like the AWS EdTech Accelerator there with Learnovate was absolutely brilliant, to be in a room of 10 or 12 other EdTech entrepreneurs and share the journey and the experience and what's happened. And just realize it's okay to not be okay as an entrepreneur. It's okay for things not to be going perfectly, to be able to adapt, to innovate, and be that little bit resilient as well, because it's a series of ticks and tacks along the way here. But you cannot, I simply can't do this alone. I really can't. We've got a really, really strong team around us of external advisors. A lot of them give their time freely to help us on the journey because they buy into the vision of what we want to do.
Yeah, no, and you touched on a really good point there. You sounded like you were pitching Cormac's business there about well-being for a minute. And in fact, I might ask you, Cormac. Joe touches on the challenges of being an entrepreneur. Maybe we'll wrap this up really with you and say, what advice would you have for somebody getting into this side of the EdTech journey?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I definitely agree with Joe there. Like, you need resilience, and for me, I think when you're working on your own business, you can easily get caught up in just constantly working on it, because as I said, there's always more to do. There's always more work to be done. You can always call more schools or more clients, or apply for more things. So it's taking that time for yourself as well to switch off, whether it's at the weekends or there's times you might have to work weekends if you're getting something through over the line, but you need to really take ownership of your own time and have ways to switch off, whether that's go out in nature or whatever it is you do to switch off. But I think that is so important for entrepreneurs starting out, because otherwise you're going to burn out and you won't last the journey. Like, I've been doing it 4 years, which is not really even that long. But if I didn't have those times to myself to really switch off and realize I'm in this for the long run, then I probably wouldn't have made it this far.
Thank you for that advice. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dave. And thank you, everyone. Thanks, Michelle and Cormac and Joe. Really appreciate your time.